She was a virgin and was torn from a convent to pay a debt with her own body. Given to a ruthless millionaire, she discovered a world where desire was punishment. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end. Subscribe to this channel and leave your comments saying where you're listening from. Childhood, Helena learned to be silent. In the cold corridors of the convent, between lit candles and murmured psalms, she was taught to hide her own desires, to suffocate impulses, to deny touch and gaze. She didn't know who her mother was. She never asked about her father. The only certainty she carried was that she was there because of a promise, a debt that enveloped her even without knowing how. At 19, with skin marked by fasting and a soul shaped by prayers, Helena was summoned to the Mother Superior's office. On that rainy morning in the Yorkshire countryside, the eldest nun in the convent handed her a sealed letter and said with moist eyes, "Keep this. One day you'll need to know who you really are." She didn't understand what it meant until she was delivered to a man who seemed made of stone. Alexander Caldwell, 43 years old, billionaire, owner of shipyards and maritime empires, known as much for his cutting silence as for the emotional ruins he left in the women who dared to love him. Helena wasn't brought to him by chance. She was offered as payment for a debt that preceded even her birth. Decades before, Helena's father had ruined Alexander's mother, involving her in a scandal that led to her death. Alexander swore revenge. When the financial ruin of Helena's patriarch finally came, the settling of accounts was sealed. He demanded the daughter in exchange, not out of lust, but to break what remained of that man's lineage. The drive from Yorkshire to London took nearly 5 hours. Helena sat in the back of a black Mercedes, her small cloth bag on her lap, watching the green hills give way to grey motorways and finally to the brutal architecture of the city. She had never been to London, had never been anywhere really. The convent was all she knew, its routines, its prayers, its certainties. Now those certainties were crumbling like ash between her fingers. The driver, a middle-aged man with silver at his temples, said nothing to her, didn't look at her through the rear-view mirror. She might as well have been cargo. When they pulled through the iron gates of the Caldwell estate in Hampstead, Helena felt her breath catch. The mansion rose before her like a monument to power, all pale stone and tall windows that reflected the grey sky back at itself. It looked more like a museum than a home, cold, impenetrable. She was led inside by a housekeeper named Mrs. Davison, a woman in her 60s with steel-coloured hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. "You'll be in the East Wing," she said, her voice clipped and efficient. "Mr. Caldwell doesn't like to be disturbed before 10 in the morning or after 9 at night. Meals are served at specific times. You'll learn the schedule. Don't wander. Don't touch anything that isn't yours." Helena nodded, though she wanted to ask, what exactly was hers? Her room was larger than the dormitory she'd shared with 3 other girls at the convent. The bed had crisp white linens. There was a window overlooking the gardens, perfectly manicured hedges and gravel paths that looked as though they'd been measured with a ruler. Everything was pristine. Everything was controlled. She set her bag on the bed and pulled out the only thing she owned, a worn Bible, a wooden rosary, a photograph of the convent's chapel, and the sealed letter she'd never opened. She held the letter now, turning it over in her hands. The wax seal was still intact, dark red, pressed with some kind of crest she didn't recognize. The Mother Superior had told her to keep it, that one day she would need to know who she really was. But Helena was afraid that opening it would change something fundamental, that whatever truth it held would be worse than not knowing. She tucked it into the drawer of the bedside table and tried to pray. But the words felt hollow here. They echoed differently against marble and glass than they had against stone and wood. That evening she was told to come down to dinner. She changed into the only dress she had that wasn't from the convent, a simple grey thing that a church volunteer had given her years ago. It hung loose on her thin frame. When she walked into the dining room, Alexander Caldwell was already seated at the head of a table that could have fit 20 people. He didn't stand when she entered, didn't even look up at first. She took a seat at the opposite end of the table as Mrs. Davison had instructed. The distance between them felt deliberate, hostile. A member of the house staff served the first course, some kind of soup she didn't recognize. Helena bowed her head and clasped her hands together, whispering a prayer of thanks. "Stop that." His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Helena looked up, startled. Alexander was watching her now, his grey eyes cold and unreadable. He was handsome in a brutal sort of way. Sharp jaw, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, the kind of face that belonged on currency or in oil paintings. But there was something deeply unsettling about him, something that radiated control and danger in equal measure. "I said stop that," he repeated, his voice low. "I won't have that superstitious nonsense in my house." Helena's hands trembled slightly, but she lowered them to her lap. "I was only giving thanks." "To whom?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "To some invisible deity who supposedly cares whether you're grateful for soup. Or to me, since I'm the one who paid for the roof over your head." She said nothing. Didn't know what to say. At the convent, silence had been a virtue. Here it felt like weakness. "You were raised by nuns," he continued, more statement than question, taught to be meek, obedient, to accept suffering as some kind of holy gift. He picked up his wine glass, swirled it once. "Tell me, Helena, do you know why you're here?" She met his gaze, forced herself not to look away. "Because my father owed you something. Your father owed me everything." There was venom in his voice now, barely contained. "He destroyed my mother, ruined her reputation, her health, her will to live. And when she finally put a bullet through her skull in our drawing room, he didn't even have the decency to attend the funeral." He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving hers. "So yes, he owed me. And now you're the payment." Helena's stomach turned. She had known on some level that this was about more than money. But hearing it said so plainly, that she was collateral, a transaction, made it real in a way that hollowed her out. "What are you going to do with me?" she asked quietly. Alexander smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I haven't decided yet." The rest of the meal passed in silence. Helena barely touched her food. When it was over, she excused herself and retreated to her room, where she knelt beside the bed and tried to pray. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she lay awake for hours, listening to the vast silence of the house, feeling the weight of her new reality settle over her like a shroud. The days that followed established a pattern. Helena woke early out of habit and found the house already stirring with quiet efficiency. The staff moved like ghosts, efficient, nearly invisible. They didn't speak to her unless necessary. She took her meals alone except for dinner, which she was required to attend with Alexander. He rarely spoke during these meals, but she could feel his eyes on her, studying her like she was some kind of puzzle he was trying to solve. She wasn't allowed to leave the estate. Mrs. Davison made that clear. "Mr. Caldwell's orders," she said, her tone making it obvious that discussion was pointless. So Helena walked the gardens instead, memorizing the paths, counting the roses that bloomed despite the autumn chill. She found a small chapel on the grounds, unused, dusty, clearly forgotten. She cleaned it herself, lit candles she found in a storage room, and tried to recreate some sense of the sacred. But even there, she couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, Helena was sitting in the library, a massive room lined with books she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch, when Alexander appeared in the doorway. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved with the kind of silence that suggested he'd learned to hunt. "Reading?" he asked, though it was obvious she wasn't. The book in her lap was closed. "I wasn't sure if I was permitted," she said. He crossed the room, his footsteps muffled by thick Persian rugs, and stood beside her chair. This close she could smell him, something expensive and masculine, cedar and smoke. It made her pulse quicken in a way that frightened her. "You're permitted to do whatever you like," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Within reason." "What's reasonable?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. His mouth quirked slightly. Not quite a smile. An interesting question from someone who spent her entire life following rules she never chose. "I chose to follow them," she said, though even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. "Did you?" He reached out almost casually and brushed a strand of dark hair away from her face. The touch was brief, but it sent a shock through her system. "Or did you simply never know there was another option?" Helena's breath caught. She should pull away, should stand up, leave the room, put distance between them. But she didn't move. Couldn't move. Alexander's hand lingered near her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with an intimacy that felt both tender and threatening. "You're afraid of me," he said softly. "Yes," she whispered. "Good." He pulled back, the moment broken. "Fear keeps you honest." He left the room as silently as he'd entered, and Helena sat there for a long time afterward, her heart hammering, her skin still burning where he'd touched her. That night, she lay in bed and let herself think about things the nuns had taught her not to think about the way his hand had felt against her skin, about the heat that had pooled low in her belly, unfamiliar and dangerous. She had been taught that desire was sin, that the body was a temple that must be kept pure. But what did purity mean in a place like this? What did it mean when she'd already been sold like property? She thought about the sealed letter in the drawer beside her bed, about all the things she didn't know about herself. And for the first time since arriving at the Caldwell estate, she felt something other than fear. She felt anger, hot and bright and clarifying. The next morning she went to the chapel and didn't pray. Instead, she sat in the dusty pew and made a decision. If she was going to survive this place, this man, she needed to understand what she was fighting against. She needed to know the truth about her father, about the debt, about the woman whose death had set all of this in motion. She started in the library that evening, pulling books about London society from the shelves, looking for mentions of the Caldwell family. She found them easily enough. Alexander's father had been a shipping magnate, his grandfather before him. Old money, old power. There were photographs in some of the books. A stern-looking man in Victorian dress, a woman with pale eyes and a tragic expression. Research. Helena jumped, nearly dropping the book. Alexander stood in the doorway again, watching her with that unsettling intensity. "I wanted to understand," she said, deciding honesty was less dangerous than a lie. "Understand what?" "Why you hate my father so much." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or respect. He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. The sound of it clicking shut made Helena's pulse spike. "My mother," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "was a brilliant woman. She ran the company's finances, made investments that tripled our wealth. But she was also fragile, sensitive to criticism, to scandal." He poured himself a drink from the bar cart near the window. "Your father seduced her, made promises he had no intention of keeping. And when she believed him, when she trusted him, he used the information she'd given him to sabotage a business deal. The scandal nearly destroyed us." Helena felt sick, and she killed herself because of it. She killed herself because she couldn't live with the humiliation. He downed the whiskey in one swallow. "I found her. I was 16. There was so much blood, Helena, so much blood that it soaked through the carpet, into the floorboards. We had to replace the entire room." She didn't know what to say. What could she say? "I'm sorry" felt insufficient, almost insulting. "So when your father's debts finally caught up with him," Alexander continued, his voice hardening, "when he came crawling to me for help, I made him an offer. His daughter for his freedom. And the bastard took it without hesitation." Helena's hands clenched into fists. "He's a coward." "Yes." Alexander's eyes found hers across the room. "But you're not." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning she didn't fully understand. Over the following weeks, something shifted. Alexander still kept his distance, still watched her with that calculating gaze, but there was a new quality to his attention. He began asking her questions during dinner, about her childhood, her beliefs, what she thought about the world beyond the convent walls. At first she was guarded, giving brief answers designed to reveal nothing. But gradually she found herself speaking more freely, telling him about the other girls at the convent, about Sister Margaret who had taught her to read, about the garden where she'd grown herbs for the kitchen. "Did you want to take vows?" he asked one evening. "Become a nun yourself?" Helena considered the question. "I don't know if I wanted it, or if it just seemed like the only path available to me. And now? Now I don't know what I want." It was the most honest thing she'd said to him. The physical distance between them was shrinking too. He no longer sat at the opposite end of the table during meals. Instead, he took the chair beside hers, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Sometimes their hands would brush when reaching for the same thing, the salt, the wine, and neither of them would pull away immediately. Helena knew what was happening. She wasn't naive despite the nun's best efforts. She was being drawn into something dangerous, something that would change her irrevocably. Part of her wanted to resist, to maintain the walls she'd built around herself. But another part, a part that was growing stronger every day, wanted to see what lay on the other side of those walls. The first real break came during a storm. London in November was cold and wet, but this was something else. A tempest that rattled the windows and sent tree branches scraping against the stone walls like clawing fingers. The power went out around midnight. Helena had been lying in bed, unable to sleep, when the darkness became absolute. She got up, fumbling for matches, but couldn't find any. The house was massive and unfamiliar in the dark. She made her way into the hallway, one hand trailing along the wall, and that's when she heard it, footsteps approaching. "Helena?" Alexander's voice, closer than she'd expected. She froze. "I'm here," she managed. A light appeared, his phone held up like a torch. In its glow she could see him clearly for the first time, without the usual layers of formality and distance. His hair was disheveled, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked almost human. "You're shaking," he said. She hadn't realized she was. Whether from cold or fear or something else, she couldn't say. He closed the distance between them and draped something warm around her shoulders, a blanket he must have grabbed from his room. His hands lingered on her arms, steadying her. "The generators will kick in soon," he said quietly. But until then, thunder cracked so loud and close that Helena flinched. Without thinking, she stepped closer to him, and his arms came around her. It was the first time he'd truly held her, the first time she'd allowed herself to be held by anyone in years. She could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, strong and steady. Could feel the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. And underneath the expensive cologne, she caught his real scent, salt and skin and something indefinably male that made her head spin. "Helena," he said, and there was something raw in his voice, something unguarded. She tilted her head back to look at him. In the dim light from his phone, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. His grey eyes were dark, pupils blown wide. "I should take you back to your room," he said, but he didn't move. "You should," she agreed. But she didn't move either. His hand came up, cupping her face the way he had that evening in the library. But this time he didn't pull away. This time his thumb traced her lower lip, and she felt her breath hitch. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough. She should. She knew she should. But instead she heard herself whisper, "No." He kissed her. Not gently. Not with the tenderness of a lover, but with the desperation of a man who'd been denying himself too long. His mouth was demanding, claiming, and she responded with an intensity that shocked her. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he groaned against her lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the lights flickered back on. The generators had kicked in. Reality came flooding back with the light. Alexander stepped back, his expression shuttered once more. "Go to bed, Helena." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. And this time she obeyed, fleeing to her room before she could do something they'd both regret. But as she lay in bed afterward, her lips still burning from his kiss, she knew something fundamental had changed. They'd crossed a line, and there was no going back now. The morning after the storm, Helena woke with the taste of him still on her lips. She lay in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the woman who had pulled Alexander Caldwell closer in the darkness with the girl who had spent 19 years praying for purity. They felt like two different people. Perhaps they were. When she finally went down to breakfast, Alexander was already gone. Mrs. Davison informed her, with her usual clipped efficiency, that he'd left for the office early and wouldn't return until evening. Helena felt relief and disappointment in equal measure. She needed time to think, to process what had happened, but she also wanted to see him again, to know if the heat between them had been real or just a product of darkness and adrenaline. She spent the day exploring parts of the mansion she hadn't dared enter before. The West Wing, which Mrs. Davison had never explicitly forbidden but had somehow communicated, was off-limits through strategic silence. Helena found rooms filled with dust-covered furniture, paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and finally, a study that clearly belonged to Alexander. The door was unlocked. She hesitated only a moment before entering. The room smelled of leather and old paper. His desk was neat, organized with military precision. There were files stacked in careful piles, a laptop closed and centered on the blotter, pens arranged by size. But it was the bookshelf behind the desk that caught her attention. Between volumes on maritime law and shipping logistics were older books, their spines cracked with age. She pulled one out and found photographs tucked inside, yellowed with time but still clear enough to see the faces. A woman with Alexander's eyes. His mother, she realized, beautiful and sad, even in photographs where she was smiling. There was a fragility to her that came through even in still images. In one photo, she stood beside a much younger Alexander, maybe 15 or 16, and the boy's face was already hardening into the man he would become. Helena found more photographs. Newspaper clippings, too. "Tragedy strikes Caldwell family," read one headline from 27 years ago. She scanned the article, piecing together what Alexander had told her with these fragments of public record. His mother's death had been ruled a suicide. There was mention of recent business difficulties and personal troubles, but nothing specific. Nothing about her father. Find anything interesting? Helena spun around, heart hammering. Alexander stood in the doorway, still in his suit from the office, watching her with an unreadable expression. She'd been so absorbed in her searching that she hadn't heard him return. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "I shouldn't have—" "No." He moved into the room, loosening his tie. "You shouldn't have. But I'm not surprised." He took the photograph from her hands, studying his mother's face. "You're looking for answers. For some way to make sense of why you're here. Are you angry?" "I should be." He set the photograph back on the shelf, but gently, like it was something precious. "But I'm tired of being angry. It's exhausting, Helena, carrying hate for this long." He turned to face her, and in the afternoon light streaming through the window, she could see the weariness in him. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you? When your father brought you to my office to seal our agreement?" She shook her head. "I thought you looked exactly like her, my mother. Same dark hair, same delicate features. I thought it was fate's cruel joke, giving me the daughter of my enemy, wrapped in the face of the woman he destroyed." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I wanted to make you suffer, to break you the way he broke her. And now?" Helena's voice was barely a whisper. He crossed the space between them, and she held her ground even as every instinct screamed at her to run. When he reached her, he didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the scent of his cologne mixed with London rain. "Now I don't know what I want," he said, "except that I can't stop thinking about last night, about the way you kissed me back, like you'd been starving for it." Heat flooded through her, shame and desire tangled together so completely she couldn't separate them. "I was taught that desire is sin. And what do you believe?" It was the same question he'd asked before in different words. What did she believe now that she was outside the convent walls? Now that she'd tasted things the nuns had told her to deny? "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know anything anymore." His hand came up, cupping her face the way he had the night before. But this time in the light she could see everything. The hunger in his eyes. The war he was fighting with himself. "Tell me to stop," he said again, but she was tired of denying, tired of being afraid. She rose on her toes and kissed him, and he responded like a man breaking. His arms came around her, lifting her against him, and she wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively. He carried her to the desk, sweeping papers aside with one hand, setting her down on the polished wood. "We shouldn't," he said against her mouth, even as his hands slid under her sweater, finding warm skin. "I know," she breathed, but neither of them stopped. His mouth moved to her neck, her collarbone, places that made her gasp and arch against him. Her hands fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel skin against skin. When he pulled back to look at her, his pupils were blown so wide his eyes looked black. "If we do this," he said roughly, "there's no going back. Do you understand?" She understood that she was crossing a threshold, that the girl she'd been was dying, and someone new was being born in her place. She understood that this man could destroy her, that maybe he still wanted to, that she should be terrified, but she also understood that she'd never felt more alive than she did in this moment. "I understand," she said. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, and she felt herself melting into it. His hands were everywhere, her waist, her breast sliding up her thighs. She made sounds she'd never made before, desperate and hungry, and he swallowed them all. When he finally entered her, there was pain, sharp and bright, but she didn't cry out. Just held on to him, her nails digging into his shoulders, breathing through it until the pain faded into something else. Something that built and built until she was trembling with it. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice rough. "Don't close your eyes. I want to see you." She forced her eyes open, met his gaze, and what she saw there stole her breath. Not just desire, something rawer, more desperate. He moved inside her and she moved with him, finding a rhythm that felt ancient and new all at once. When she came apart, it was with his name on her lips and his hand over her mouth to muffle the sound. He followed moments later, his face buried in her neck, his body shuddering against hers. In the aftermath, they stayed tangled together, both breathing hard. Helena felt changed, fundamentally altered in a way she couldn't articulate. She'd given him something she could never get back, and the terrifying thing was she didn't regret it. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, his hand gentle on her face. No, it wasn't entirely true. There was discomfort, a soreness that she knew would linger. But it wasn't the kind of hurt that mattered. He helped her down from the desk, steadied her when her legs proved unreliable. His shirt was still half-buttoned, his hair disheveled in a way that made him look younger, more human. He started to say something, then stopped, shaking his head. "What?" she asked. "I should apologize, but I'm not sorry." Neither was she, and that realization was perhaps more frightening than anything else. The days that followed established a new pattern, one far more dangerous than the old routine. Alexander came to her room at night or summoned her to his. They would collide with the kind of desperation that spoke to deeper hungers than just the physical. He taught her things the nuns had never mentioned, showed her that her body was capable of pleasures she'd never imagined. And in the dark, in the moments after, he would sometimes talk about his childhood, his mother, the weight of carrying the Caldwell name. She used to sing, he told her one night, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. Opera. She had this beautiful voice, and she'd sing while she worked in her study. I can still hear it sometimes in certain rooms of the house. Do you miss her? Syed felt like a foolish question the moment it left her mouth. Every day. His hand stilled on her skin. But the woman I miss is the one from before. Before your father got his hooks in her. She changed after that. Became smaller somehow, fragile. I watched her disappear a little more each day, and I couldn't stop it. Helena understood then why he'd wanted to break her. It wasn't just revenge. It was a need to have control over something, to not feel helpless the way he had as a boy watching his mother crumble. "I'm not her," Helena said softly. "I know." He pulled her closer. "You're stronger than she was. Stronger than you know." But Helena didn't feel strong. She felt like she was losing herself piece by piece in him. And the most frightening part was that she didn't know if she wanted to stop. It was Mrs. Davison who first noticed the change in her. The housekeeper's sharp eyes missed nothing. One morning when Helena came down to breakfast, wearing a dress Alexander had bought her, something far more elegant than her simple convent clothes, Mrs. Davison's, mouth tightened into a thin line. "You're getting comfortable here," she said. "And it wasn't a compliment. Should I not be?" "That depends on whether you understand your position, miss." Mrs. Davison set a teacup down with more force than necessary. "Mr. Caldwell has had companionship before. It never ends well for the woman." "Is that a warning or a threat?" "It's the truth." The housekeeper's expression softened slightly. "You seem like a decent girl. I'd hate to see you destroyed for the sake of a vendetta you had no part in." The word stayed with Helena long after Mrs. Davison left. She thought about them as she wandered the gardens, as she took her meals, as she lay in Alexander's arms at night. Was she just another casualty in his war against her father? Another way to inflict pain on a man who'd already lost everything? She decided to find out. The sealed letter was still in her bedside drawer. She'd been avoiding it, afraid of what it might contain. But if she was going to survive this, if she was going to be more than just collateral damage, she needed to know the truth. That evening, when Alexander was working late in his study, Helena locked her bedroom door and broke the wax seal. The paper inside was old, yellowed at the edges, and the handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if written by someone whose hands trembled. "My dearest Helena," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have grown into the woman I always prayed you would become. There is so much I need to tell you, so much I should have told you before, but I was a coward. I am your mother." Helena's hands shook as she continued reading. "Your father, the man who raised you, at least in name, is not your biological father. I was young when I met him, barely 17, and my family was in ruins. My own father had gambled away our estate, and marriage to Richard Gray was the only way to save us from complete destruction. I agreed because I had no choice, but I did not love him, could not love him. There was another man, someone I met in secret, someone who showed me kindness when the world was cruel. We were together only once, but it was enough. When I discovered I was pregnant, I knew the child couldn't be Richard's. Our marriage had been one of convenience only, never consummated. I confessed everything to my mother, and she made arrangements. You would be born in secret, given to the convent, and Richard would never know. It was the only way to protect you from his cruelty. But there is more you must know. The man who was your true father, he was connected to a powerful family. The Caldwells. He was a business associate, someone your adoptive father later destroyed in one of his schemes. I don't know if the Caldwells ever knew about you. I pray they didn't. I pray you never become a pawn in the hatred between these families. You have your father's eyes, grey like winter sky, and his strength, I hope. Be stronger than I was, Helena, be braver, and know that I loved you even though I had to let you go. Your mother, Sarah. Helena read the letter 3 times, trying to make sense of it. If what her mother claimed was true, then Richard Gray, the man Alexander hated, wasn't even her biological father. She was the daughter of someone connected to the Caldwell family, which meant she needed to know more, needed to understand who her real father was and whether Alexander knew the truth. She found him still in his study, tie discarded, sleeves rolled up, working by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him set down his pen immediately. "What's wrong?" She handed him the letter without a word. He read it slowly, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he set it down carefully on the desk, his jaw tight. "When did you get this?" "The day I left the convent. The Mother Superior gave it to me." Helena wrapped her arms around herself. "Is it true? Was my mother involved with someone from your family?" "I don't know." But there was something in his voice, uncertainty maybe, or recognition. He stood, pacing to the window. "My father had a brother, Nathaniel. He died in a car accident when I was 12. There were always rumors about him, about affairs and indiscretions. My mother used to defend him, said the rumors were lies spread by jealous competitors. Could he have been my father?" "It's possible." Alexander turned to face her. "You have the Caldwell eyes. I thought it was coincidence, but—" He laughed bitterly. "My God, if you're Nathaniel's daughter, then you're my cousin, and I've been—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Helena felt numb. "What does this mean?" "It means everything I've done to you, everything I've taken from you, was based on a lie." He looked stricken, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "You weren't Richard Gray's to give. You were never part of his debt because you were never his daughter." "So what am I?" Helena heard her voice rising. "What does that make me to you?" He crossed the room, gripping her shoulders. "It makes you the only person in this goddamn house who's innocent. It makes you someone I've wronged in ways I can never fix." His hands tightened. "Helena, I'm sorry. For all of it. For bringing you here. For using you. For—" She kissed him, cutting off his apology. Not because she forgave him, but because she didn't know what else to do with the chaos raging inside her. He responded for a moment, then pulled back, shaking his head. "No, we can't. Not now that we know." "Why not?" She was angry now, truly angry. "Because we might be related. We don't know that for certain, and even if we are—" She laughed harshly. "You've already ruined me, Alexander. You've already taken everything. What difference does it make now?" "It makes every difference." But even as he said it, his resolve was crumbling. She could see it in the way his eyes kept dropping to her mouth, in the tension in his body. "Then let's be ruined together," she said, and pulled him down to her again. They came together with a kind of desperation that felt like grieving, like they were trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. And afterward, lying tangled in the sheets of his bed, Helena realized she'd fallen in love with him. Despite everything, despite the cruelty and the manipulation and the lies, she loved him. And that love was going to destroy her. In the days that followed, Alexander began investigating their connection in earnest. He hired private investigators, pored over old family records, tracked down people who had known his uncle Nathaniel. Helena watched him become obsessed with finding the truth, and she understood that he needed it, needed to know whether his guilt was justified or just another form of self-flagellation. The answer came 2 weeks later. The investigator's report was comprehensive, clinical in its detail. Nathaniel Caldwell had indeed been involved with Sarah Gray during the months Helena would have been conceived. There were hotel receipts, witness statements, even photographs of them together at various social events, and a DNA test using samples from stored family records confirmed it with 99% certainty. Helena was Nathaniel's daughter. "You're a Caldwell," Alexander said, setting the report down. They were in his study again, the place where so much had changed between them. "Which makes you my first cousin, and under British law that means—" "That what we've done is legal but taboo," Helena finished. She'd looked it up herself. First cousins could marry in England, but it was frowned upon, considered incestuous by some, even if the law disagreed. "Helena, don't," she stood, needing distance. "Don't apologize again. Don't tell me we need to stop. I'm tired of apologies and rules and people telling me what I should or shouldn't do with my own body. This is different." "Why? Because now you know we share blood?" She laughed bitterly. "You were fine with destroying me when you thought I was your enemy's daughter. But now that I'm family, suddenly you have scruples? That's not fair." "None of this is fair," she was shouting now, months of repressed emotion pouring out. "You brought me here as payment for a debt I didn't owe. You seduced me. You made me want you, made me need you, and now you want to take it all back because of some piece of paper that says we share a grandfather." He moved toward her, but she backed away. "Don't touch me. Not if you're going to leave me anyway. Not if this was all just another way to hurt me." It wasn't. His voice was raw. "Helena, it stopped being about revenge the moment you kissed me in that storm. Maybe even before that. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I need you to believe me when I say, I never meant to fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Helena felt her anger drain away, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. "Then what do we do?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." He ran a hand through his hair, looking lost. "I don't have an answer, Helena. All I know is that I can't lose you, even if keeping you damns us both." Before either of them could say more, Alexander's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered it. Helena watched his expression change, concern, then anger, then something that looked almost like fear. "When?" he demanded. "How long have you known?" A pause. "Don't do anything. I'll handle it." He hung up and immediately began making another call. "What's wrong?" Helena asked. "Get your things. We need to leave now." "What? Why?" He was already moving, pulling files from his desk, his movements sharp and efficient. "That was my head of security. Someone's been asking questions about you, about your connection to the Caldwell family, and they've been surveilling the house for the past 3 days." Fear spiked through her. "Who?" "I don't know yet, but whoever they are, they're not friends." He looked at her, and she saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I've made a lot of enemies in business, Helena, and now that people know you're important to me, now that you're a Caldwell, you're vulnerable, you're a target." Helena thought of the Mother Superior's words, about how she'd need to know who she really was. Had the old nun known this would happen? Had she been trying to warn her? "Where will we go?" "I have a property in Cornwall, remote, secure. We'll go there until I can figure out who's behind this and what they want." He grabbed her hand. "I won't let anyone hurt you, I promise." It was a promise he had no right to make, a promise that might already be too late to keep. But as Helena followed him out of the study, her hand clutched in his. She chose to believe him anyway. Because what else could she do? She'd already lost everything, her innocence, her faith, her old life. All she had left was him. And despite everything, despite the lies and the pain and the impossible complications of their relationship, he was enough. He had to be enough. They left the Hampstead house within the hour, Alexander driving them, through the rain-slicked streets of London toward the motorway. Helena watched the city lights blur past the window and wondered if she'd ever see this place again. Wondered if the girl who'd arrived here months ago, terrified and alone, would recognize the woman she'd become. She didn't think so. That girl was gone. And in her place was someone harder, stronger, more dangerous. Someone who had learned that love could be both salvation and destruction. Someone who was willing to risk everything for a man who'd once wanted to break her. As they drove into the dark, Helena reached over and took Alexander's hand. He squeezed it once, hard, a gesture that said everything words couldn't. They were in this together now. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side, even if it destroyed them both. The drive to Cornwall took nearly 6 hours through rain that turned the motorway into a river of red taillights. Alexander drove in tense silence, his jaw tight, checking the mirrors more often than necessary. Helena watched him, studying the lines of stress around his mouth, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel like he was trying to strangle it. She wanted to ask questions. Who did he think was watching them? What exactly they were running from? But something in his expression told her to wait. They stopped once at a service station just past Bristol, where Alexander made several phone calls, while Helena used the facilities and bought coffee neither of them would drink. When she returned to the car, she found him leaning against the driver's side door, staring at his phone with an expression that made her stomach drop. "What is it?" He looked up and she saw fear there, real fear. "The investigators found something. The man who's been asking questions about you, his name is Matthew Ashford." The name meant nothing to Helena, but clearly it meant something to Alexander. "Who is he?" "Someone I thought I'd buried a long time ago." He opened the car door for her. "Get in. I'll explain on the way." Back on the road, with the rain hammering against the windscreen and the wipers working overtime, Alexander told her the story. Matthew Ashford had once been his father's business partner, back when the Caldwell shipping empire was still being built. The two men had started the company together, equal shares, equal say. But Nathaniel Caldwell, Alexander's father, had been ruthless in ways that Matthew couldn't stomach. There had been deals made with less than reputable clients, bribes paid, safety regulations ignored in the name of profit. "My father forced Matthew out," Alexander said, his voice flat. "Used legal technicalities and backroom deals to dilute his shares until he had no choice but to sell. Matthew left with a fraction of what the company was worth. He tried to fight it in court, but my father had better lawyers, more money, more connections. The case dragged on for years, and eventually Matthew gave up. I was young then, maybe 10 or 11. I remember him coming to the house one last time, shouting at my father in the foyer. Security had to remove him. And now he's come back? Apparently." Alexander's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "After my father died, I restructured the company. Made amends where I could. Paid off old debts, tried to run things more ethically. But some wounds don't heal. Some grudges don't fade." Helena absorbed this, fitting it into the larger picture. "You think he wants revenge?" "I think he wants what he believes is rightfully his. The company. The Caldwell name. Everything my father took from him." He glanced at her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. "And I think he's figured out that the fastest way to hurt me is through you." "But why me?" "He couldn't have known about our connection until recently." "No, but he knew you were living in my house. Knew that I'd brought you there, kept you there." "That was enough." Alexander's voice was bitter. "I made you a target the moment I brought you into my world, Helena. This is my fault." She wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't his fault, but the truth was more complicated. He had brought her into this. Had made her visible, vulnerable. But she'd also chosen to stay. Chosen to fall in love with him, despite every warning sign. "What does he want?" she asked instead. "I don't know yet. But we're going to find out." They reached Cornwall just before dawn. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world washed clean and grey. The property was exactly as Alexander had described, remote. They turned off the main road onto a narrow lane that wound through fields and moorland, then through a dense copse of trees that opened suddenly onto a cliff edge. The house sat there, a grey stone structure that looked like it had grown out of the rock itself. Beyond it, the sea crashed against the cliffs in endless rhythm. It was my mother's, Alexander said as they pulled up to the front door. She inherited it from her grandmother. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. I used to come here when I needed to think. The interior was sparse but comfortable. Exposed beams, stone fireplaces, furniture that looked like it had been there for generations. Alexander gave her a quick tour. Kitchen, sitting room, 3 bedrooms upstairs, a study overlooking the sea. There was no staff here, no Mrs. Davison watching with disapproving eyes, just the 2 of them and the sound of waves. There's a security system, Alexander explained, showing her the control panel near the front door. Cameras, motion sensors. If anyone tries to approach the property, we'll know. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion finally showing through the adrenaline. Try to get some rest. I need to make some calls. But Helena couldn't rest. She wandered through the house while Alexander locked himself in the study, his voice a low murmur through the door. She found herself in what must have been his mother's room. The furniture was covered with white sheets, ghostly in the dim light. She pulled back one sheet and found a vanity with an oval mirror, the surface dusty, but still reflecting her face back at her. She looked different, she realized. Thinner, yes. The past months had worn her down physically, but there was something else. Something in her eyes. A hardness that hadn't been there before. The girl who'd left the convent would have been horrified by the woman looking back at her now. Would have seen sin and shame written across her features. But Helena didn't feel ashamed. She felt awake, alive, dangerous. She opened the vanity drawer and found old cosmetics, a hairbrush with strands of dark hair still caught in its bristles, a small jewelry box. Inside the box were photographs, more images of Alexander's mother. In one she was young, maybe Helena's age, standing on these same cliffs with the wind in her hair, laughing at the camera. She looked happy, free. Helena wondered when that had changed, when the weight of the Caldwell name had begun to crush her. She loved it here. Helena turned to find Alexander standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled from the long drive. She was beautiful, Helena said. She was. He moved into the room, taking the photograph from Helena's hands. She used to bring me here in the summers. We'd walk the cliffs, collect shells on the beach. She was different here, away from London, away from my father's expectations. She could breathe. What happened to her? Really? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. My father destroyed her piece by piece. He was never physically violent, but he was cruel in other ways, dismissive, controlling. He'd built this empire and he wanted her to be the perfect wife, elegant, silent, decorative. But she was so much more than that. She was brilliant with numbers, had a gift for seeing patterns in data that no one else could see. She wanted to be a real partner in the business, not just a figurehead. And he wouldn't let her? He let her for a while. She was good at it, better than him in some ways. But then, he set the photograph down carefully, then she met your mother, or rather your mother's family. Richard Gray approached my father with a business proposal, some kind of shipping contract. My mother was assigned to handle the negotiations. That's when she met Sarah Gray. Helena's breath caught. They knew each other. More than that. They were friends. Close friends from what I've been able to piece together. The investigator found letters between them. Sarah was trapped in a marriage she didn't want, and my mother understood that. They confided in each other. What about my real father? Nathaniel? Alexander's expression darkened. He was charming, reckless, everything my father wasn't. Sarah was young, vulnerable, and Nathaniel saw an opportunity. I don't think he loved her. I don't think he was capable of that kind of love. But he wanted her and he took her, and when she got pregnant he disappeared. And your mother? Tried to help her. Tried to protect her. But Richard Gray found out about the affair, I don't know how, and he used it. Threatened to expose not just Sarah, but my mother's involvement in hiding the truth. He demanded business concessions, inside information. My mother, trying to protect her friend, gave him what he wanted. And when my father found out what she'd done, Helena could imagine the rest. He blamed her. He destroyed her reputation, made it look like she'd been the one having an affair, like she'd betrayed the company. The scandal broke her. She tried to fight back, tried to tell the truth, but no one believed her. Richard Gray had covered his tracks too well. And Nathaniel was dead by then, killed in that car accident, so there was no one to corroborate her story. Alexander's voice was hollow. She killed herself a year later, put a gun to her head in the drawing room of the Hampstead house while my father was at work and I was at school. Helena felt tears on her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry." He pulled her close and she could feel him trembling. "Just understand why I needed revenge. Why I blamed Richard Gray for everything. And why, when he came to me, desperate and broken, offering his daughter to settle his debts, I said yes. I wanted to hurt him the way he'd hurt my family. But I'm not his daughter. No, you're the daughter of the man who set all of this in motion, the daughter of my uncle, conceived in an affair that destroyed multiple lives. He laughed bitterly. The sins of the fathers visited upon the children. We never had a chance, did we? Helena pulled back to look at him. We have a chance now. We're here together away from all of it. For how long? Matthew Ashford knows about you, Helena. He knows you're a Caldwell. And if he's smart, and he is, he'll use that against me. Then let him come. She was surprised by the steel in her own voice. I'm not afraid anymore. You should be. Maybe, but I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of running. She took his face in her hands. We'll face this together. Whatever comes. He kissed her then, desperate and hungry, and she responded with equal need. They stumbled to the bed, pulling at clothes, needing the connection more than air. They made love with a kind of frantic intensity, as if they could outrun their demons through pleasure. And afterward, tangled in sheets that smelled of lavender and dust, Helena finally let herself believe that they might survive this. The next few days passed in strange suspension. Alexander worked from the study, making calls, reviewing security footage, trying to track Matthew Ashford's movements. Helena explored the property, the cliffs, the beach below, the old greenhouse behind the house, where Alexander's mother had apparently grown herbs and flowers. She found peace in the wildness of it, in the way the wind tore at her hair and the sea spray salted her lips. She also found his mother's journals. They were in the greenhouse, tucked away in a cabinet beneath old terracotta pots, leather-bound books filled with elegant handwriting. Helena knew she shouldn't read them, that it was a violation of privacy. But she needed to understand. Needed to know the woman whose ghost haunted this place. The entries started optimistically, a young bride excited about her marriage, about the future. But gradually the tone shifted. Disappointment crept in, then sadness, then something darker. He doesn't see me, one entry read. I am furniture to him, decoration. I speak and he looks through me as if I'm glass. Later, I met the most extraordinary woman today, Sarah Gray. She understands. She knows what it is to be trapped. And then, I've done something terrible. I helped Sarah hide her condition, helped her arrange things with the convent. If William finds out, he'll destroy me. But I couldn't let her suffer alone. I couldn't. The final entries were almost illegible, the handwriting shaky. He knows what I did. Richard Gray has proof and he's using it. William looks at me like I'm a stranger, like I'm the enemy. I've lost everything, lost myself. There's only one way out now, only one way to make it stop. Helena closed the journal, her hands shaking. The weight of all this history, all these interconnected tragedies, it was almost too much to bear. She and Alexander were born from this darkness, shaped by it. How could they hope to escape it? She brought the journals to him that evening. He read them in silence, his face growing paler with each page. When he finished, he set them aside and stared out at the dark sea. She knew, he said finally. She knew about you. Knew you existed. Does that change anything? It changes everything. He turned to look at her. Don't you see? She died protecting you, protecting your mother. This wasn't just about Richard Gray's betrayal. It was about her trying to do the right thing and being destroyed for it. Helena felt something shift inside her, a sense of purpose crystallizing. Then we owe it to her to survive this, to not let their mistakes define us. How? How do we do that when we're built on lies and tragedy? By choosing differently, by refusing to let the past control us. She moved to him, taking his hands. Your mother tried to help my mother. They were friends, Alexander. Maybe we're not cousins because of some sordid affair. Maybe we're family because two women loved each other enough to risk everything. Maybe that's the real legacy. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you have me anyway. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other against the darkness outside and the ghosts within. And Helena felt something she hadn't felt since leaving the convent: hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. The call came 3 days later. Alexander was in the study when his phone rang. Helena heard his voice rise, sharp with anger, then fall to something colder and more controlled. When he emerged, his face was grim. He wants to meet. Matthew Ashford? Yes, tomorrow in Truro. He says he has information I need to hear. It's a trap. Probably. But I have to go. Alexander was already moving, pulling on his jacket. You'll stay here. The security system is armed. Don't open the door for anyone but me. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Alexander. No. His voice was hard. I won't risk you. Not again. They argued for an hour, but Helena knew she wouldn't win. Alexander was immovable when it came to her safety. So she watched him leave the next morning, his car disappearing down the lane, and felt dread settle into her bones. She tried to distract herself, cleaned the kitchen, attempted to read one of the books from his mother's collection, but she couldn't focus, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The feeling proved prophetic. Around noon, the security system's alarm began to blare. Helena rushed to the control panel and saw red lights flashing. Motion detected at the south perimeter. The cameras showed a figure approaching through the trees. Male, tall, wearing dark clothes and moving with purpose. Helena's first instinct was to hide. But then she thought of everything she'd survived, everything she'd become. She wasn't that frightened girl from the convent anymore. She was a Caldwell, and Caldwells didn't hide. She grabbed Alexander's phone. He'd left it behind, using a burner instead, and called the emergency number he'd programmed. Then she went to the kitchen and pulled a knife from the block. It felt heavy and foreign in her hand, but she gripped it tightly. The knock on the door came moments later, polite, almost friendly. Miss Caldwell? I know you're in there. My name is Matthew Ashford. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk. Helena stood on the other side of the door, knife held low at her side. Alexander isn't here. I know. That's why I'm here now. I need to speak with you alone. I have nothing to say to you. But I have something to show you. Something about your mother, about who you really are. A pause. Please, Helena. 5 minutes. That's all I ask. If you don't like what I have to say, I'll leave. You have my word. She shouldn't trust him. Knew she shouldn't. But curiosity warred with caution. What could he possibly know about her mother that she didn't already know? Against every instinct screaming at her to stay inside, Helena opened the door. But she kept the knife visible. Matthew Ashford was older than she'd expected, late 60s perhaps, with silver hair and pale blue eyes. He looked more like a university professor than a criminal. He smiled when he saw the knife. Smart girl. You have your grandmother's survival instinct. My grandmother? Charlotte Caldwell. Alexander's mother, but I suppose she's your grandmother too, in a way. Through Nathaniel, he gestured to the sitting room. May I? Helena nodded warily and followed him inside, keeping distance between them. He sat in one of the armchairs and pulled a folder from his jacket. I've been investigating the Caldwell family for 30 years, he said, trying to understand how they destroyed me, how they covered their tracks so completely. And in that time, I've uncovered things that would shock you. Things that Alexander doesn't even know, such as the fact that Nathaniel Caldwell's death wasn't an accident. He opened the folder and pulled out photographs, old police reports, accident scene photos. He was murdered, run off the road by someone who wanted him silenced. Helena's blood ran cold. Herr William Caldwell, Alexander's father. Your grandfather. Matthew's expression was grave. Nathaniel knew too much. About the business practices, the illegal dealings, the bribes. He was going to go to the authorities. So William had him killed and made it look like an accident. You're lying. I wish I were. He handed her another document. This is a deathbed confession from the driver William hired. He waited 20 years, then wrote it all down before he died of cancer. It's all here. Dates, payments, details. Helena read through it, her hands shaking. If this was true, if William Caldwell had murdered his own brother, then Alexander's entire understanding of his family was built on lies. Why are you telling me this? Because Alexander deserves to know the truth, and because I think you're the only person he'll listen to. Matthew leaned forward. I don't want revenge anymore, Helena. I'm too old, too tired. But I want justice. William Caldwell is dead, but his company lives on. His legacy lives on, and as long as it does, good people will keep getting hurt. What do you want from me? Help me convince Alexander to do the right thing, to restructure the company, to make amends, to acknowledge what his father did, not for my sake, for everyone his family has destroyed over the years. Before Helena could respond, she heard it, the sound of a car engine. Alexander returning early. Matthew heard it too and stood quickly. Think about what I've said, and read those documents carefully. The truth matters, Helena, even when it hurts. He moved toward the back door. I'll contact you again. Don't tell Alexander about this meeting, not yet. Not until you've had time to process it. Then he was gone, disappearing into the trees like a ghost. Helena stood, frozen, the folder clutched in her hands, her mind reeling. When Alexander burst through the front door moments later, she barely had time to hide the documents under a cushion. Helena? Are you all right? The security system... He saw her face and crossed the room in 2 strides. What happened? Nothing. I mean, the alarm went off, but it was just a deer or something. I checked the cameras. The lie came easily, too easily. How did it go? The meeting? Alexander's expression was dark. He didn't show. The whole thing was a setup to get me away from you. Helena, we need to leave now. This place isn't safe anymore. But Helena barely heard him. Her mind was spinning with what Matthew had told her, with the implications of those documents hidden beneath the cushion. If what he said was true, then everything Alexander believed about his family was a lie. And she had to decide whether to shatter his world with the truth or protect him from it. As they packed their things and prepared to leave Cornwall behind, Helena made her choice. She slipped the folder into her bag when Alexander wasn't looking. She would read everything carefully, verify what she could, and then when the time was right, she would tell him. Because Matthew Ashford was right about one thing, the truth mattered, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. And Helena had learned in these past months that she was strong enough to bear the pain, strong enough to stand beside Alexander when his world came crashing down, strong enough to help him rebuild from the ashes. She was a Caldwell now, and Caldwell survived. No matter what it cost them, they returned to London under cover of darkness. Alexander had arranged for them to stay at a different property, a penthouse in Canary Wharf that belonged to the company, sterile and anonymous. Helena hated it on sight. All glass and steel and city lights, nothing like the wildness of Cornwall or even the cold elegance of the Hampstead house. But Alexander insisted it was secure, that Matthew Ashford wouldn't know to look for them here. Helena carried the folder with her everywhere, hidden in her bag like a bomb waiting to detonate. She read through the documents obsessively when Alexander was sleeping or on calls, memorizing every detail, looking for any flaw in Matthew's story. But the more she read, the more convinced she became that it was true. The dates matched. The confession was too detailed to be fabricated. And there were bank records showing payments from William Caldwell to a man named James Thornton, the driver who'd written the deathbed confession. The weight of it was crushing her. Every time Alexander touched her, every time he looked at her with those grey eyes full of trust and something that might be love, she felt the lie between them like a physical barrier. She was keeping the truth from him, just as everyone else in his life had done, and she hated herself for it. But she was also terrified that telling him would destroy whatever fragile thing they'd built together, that he would blame her for bringing this knowledge into his life, that he would look at her and see only the daughter of the uncle his father had murdered, the living reminder of all his family's sins. The breaking point came a week after their return to London. Alexander had been working obsessively, barely sleeping, trying to track down Matthew Ashford and neutralize whatever threat he posed. Helena found him in the study at 3 in the morning, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, his eyes bloodshot. "Come to bed," she said softly from the doorway. "I can't, I'm close to something." The investigators found a connection between Matthew and one of our competitors. I think he's planning to leak confidential information, try to tank the company's stock price. Helena moved into the room, her decision crystallizing. She couldn't let him keep fighting shadows when the real monster was the ghost of his own father. "Alexander, we need to talk." "Not now, Helena. I need to—" "Now." Her voice was harder than she'd intended. "It's important." Something in her tone made him look up. Really look at her. "What's wrong?" She pulled the folder from where she'd hidden it in her cardigan and set it on the desk between them. "Matthew Ashford came to see me. In Cornwall. While you were at the meeting that never happened." The color drained from Alexander's face. "He what?" "He came to the house. I let him in. I know I shouldn't have, but he said he had information about my mother, about who I am, and I—" She stopped, took a breath. "He told me things, Alexander. About your family. About your father." "What things?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Look at the documents. Read them yourself." She pushed the folder toward him. "And then we'll talk." She left the room because she couldn't bear to watch his face as he read, couldn't bear to see the moment when his world shattered. She went to the kitchen and made tea she wouldn't drink, stood at the window watching the city lights blur through her tears, and waited. It took him an hour. When he finally emerged from the study, he looked like he'd aged a decade. His face was ashen, his hands trembling slightly. He stood in the doorway staring at her, and she couldn't read his expression. "Is it real?" His voice was hoarse. "Tell me it's not real." "I don't know for certain, but I think it is." "Alexander, I'm so sorry. How long have you known?" He moved toward her, and there was something dangerous in his movement. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" "Since Cornwall." "Since that day. I wanted to verify it first, wanted to—" "You wanted to what? Protect me? Decide what I could and couldn't handle?" His laugh was bitter. "Christ, Helena. You're just like everyone else. Just like my father, my mother. Everyone who's ever lied to me because they thought they knew what was best. The accusation stung because it was true. I was trying to find the right time. There is no right time to tell someone that their father is a murderer." He was shouting now, something she'd rarely seen. That everything they believed about their family is a lie. That the man they spent their whole life trying to please, trying to live up to, was a monster. "I know. I know, and I'm sorry. But you needed to know. You deserve to know the truth." "Did I?" He turned away, running his hands through his hair. "Maybe I was better off ignorant. Maybe some truths are too heavy to carry." Helena felt something break inside her. "So what do we do now? Do you hate me for telling you?" "I don't know what I feel." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of pain. "I look at you and I see Nathaniel, my uncle, the man my father murdered. How am I supposed to—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I need time. I need to think." "Alexander, please." He held up a hand. "Just give me some space. I can't do this right now." He left then, grabbing his jacket and walking out of the penthouse, and Helena was alone with her guilt and the echo of his pain. The next 3 days were the longest of Helena's life. Alexander didn't come back to the penthouse. She called him repeatedly, but he didn't answer. She tried to track him down through his security team, but they'd been instructed not to reveal his location. She was trapped in the glass tower, watching the city below and feeling like she was drowning. On the 4th day, Mrs. Davison appeared at the door. The housekeeper looked older somehow, worn down by whatever secrets she carried. "He sent me to check on you," she said without preamble. "To make sure you're eating, taking care of yourself." "Where is he?" "I can't say. He made me promise." Mrs. Davison moved into the kitchen, began making tea with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "But I can tell you he's safe. And he's thinking about whether he wants me in his life anymore." Mrs. Davison paused, teacup halfway to the saucer. "He loves you, you know. I've worked for the Caldwell family for 40 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, like you're the only real thing in his world. He looks at me and sees his uncle, the man his father killed. He looks at you and sees the woman who was brave enough to tell him the truth." The housekeeper set the tea in front of Helena. "That takes courage, more than most people have." Helena wrapped her hands around the warm cup. What do you know about it? About what happened to Nathaniel? Mrs. Davison was quiet for a long moment. More than I should. I was there, you see, not when it happened, but after. I helped William Caldwell cover it up. She met Helena's eyes. I've carried that guilt for 27 years. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you're fighting against. The Caldwell family is built on secrets and lies and blood. William Caldwell destroyed everyone who got in his way. His brother, his wife, his business partners. And Alexander has spent his whole life trying to atone for sins he didn't commit, trying to be better than his father, without knowing how truly monstrous that man was. So what do? You decide if you're strong enough to stand beside him when he faces the full truth, when he realizes that his entire legacy is tainted. Mrs. Davison stood, preparing to leave. Because that's what's coming, Helena. Matthew Ashford won't stop. He's been waiting 30 years for justice. And now that Alexander knows the truth, he'll have to decide which side he's on. After Mrs. Davison left, Helena stood at the window and watched the sun set over London. She thought about the girl she'd been in the convent. Silent, obedient, afraid of her own desires. That girl was dead. In her place was a woman who'd survived being sold like property, who'd fallen in love with a man who'd wanted to destroy her, who'd discovered she was the product of murder and lies and secrets. And that woman wasn't going to give up without a fight. She found Alexander 3 days later through means that would have shocked her younger self. She'd used his laptop, left behind in the penthouse, to access his security company's tracking system, traced his phone to a location in East London, a warehouse district that looked abandoned but clearly wasn't, given the expensive cars parked outside. She took a taxi, her heart pounding, and found him in what looked like a converted loft space. Minimal furniture, brick walls, tall windows overlooking the Thames. He was standing at one of those windows when she entered, his back to her, and she knew he'd heard her come in. "How did you find me?" His voice was flat. "I'm a Caldwell. I'm resourceful." He turned then, and she saw that he looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed like he hadn't slept since leaving. "You shouldn't be here. Where else would I be?" She moved toward him, forcing herself to be brave. "Alexander, we need to talk about this. We need to—" "There's nothing to talk about." But his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, there is. We need to talk about your father, about what he did, about what it means for you, for the company, for us." "There is no us." The words were like a knife. "How can there be? You're Nathaniel's daughter. Every time I look at you, I'll remember what my father did. How can we build anything on that foundation? The same way we've built everything else." Helena's voice was stronger now, steadier. "By choosing each other despite the past, by refusing to let their sins define us. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." She closed the distance between them, took his face in her hands, forced him to look at her. "I love you, and I know you love me. That's simple. Everything else is just noise. Helena, listen to me. Your father was a monster. My biological father was a coward. Your mother and mine were victims of cruel men and crueler circumstances. We're the product of all that darkness, all that pain. But we're also more than that. We're the ones who survived, who chose love over hate, truth over lies. That has to mean something." His hands came up to cover hers, and she felt him trembling. "I don't know how to move forward from this. Don't know how to look at my family's legacy and not see blood. Then we change the legacy. We make it mean something different." Her voice was fierce now. "Matthew Ashford wants justice, so let's give it to him. Not revenge, but accountability. We acknowledge what your father did. We make amends where we can. We use the Caldwell name and the Caldwell fortune to do good instead of harm. You make it sound easy. It won't be easy. It'll be the hardest thing either of us has ever done. But we'll do it together." She leaned her forehead against his. "Please, Alexander, don't give up on us. Don't give up on me." For a long moment he said nothing. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt his body shake with sobs he'd been holding back for days. She held him while he broke, while he grieved for the father he'd never really known, for the innocence he'd lost, for the weight of carrying a murderer's name. And when he finally pulled back, his eyes red but clear, he said, "I need you to know something. I don't blame you for telling me. I was angry, yes, hurt, but you did the right thing, the brave thing. And I'm sorry I made you feel like you'd done something wrong. I should have told you sooner. No, you told me when I was ready to hear it. Any earlier and I might have done something stupid. Might have tried to bury it the way my father buried everything. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. Thank you for being strong enough to break me, for loving me enough to tell me the truth. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the fading light, and Helena felt something shift between them. A deepening, a solidifying. They'd been forged in fire, and what remained was stronger than what they'd started with. The confrontation with Matthew Ashford happened 2 weeks later. Alexander arranged the meeting, not in some shadowy location, but in the Caldwell Company's boardroom. He invited Matthew along with his lawyers and a mediator. Helena insisted on being there despite Alexander's protests. I'm part of this too, she said. I have as much right to be there as anyone. Matthew Ashford looked older than when Helena had last seen him, but there was a fire in his eyes that spoke to decades of buried rage. He sat across the table from Alexander and Helena, flanked by legal representation, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Thank you for coming, Alexander said finally. I've read the documents you gave Helena. I've had them verified by independent investigators, and I want you to know I believe you. Matthew's expression didn't change, and I want to make this right, not just for you, but for everyone my father hurt. I'm prepared to offer you a settlement, full compensation for what you lost plus interest, enough to make up for 30 years of injustice. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? I want acknowledgement. I want the world to know what William Caldwell did. To me, to your uncle, to everyone he destroyed in his pursuit of power. Matthew leaned forward. I want the Caldwell name to be synonymous with accountability, not legacy. Alexander nodded slowly. I can do that. I'm prepared to release a public statement detailing my father's crimes, to cooperate with any legal investigations, to restructure the company's board to include oversight from ethics committees and victim advocates. And the company itself will continue operating, but differently, ethically, with transparency and accountability built into every level. Alexander's voice was steady. I can't change what my father did, but I can change what the Caldwell name means going forward. Matthew studied him for a long moment. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. And her? Matthew's eyes shifted to Helena. Where does she fit into this? She's family. Alexander's hand found Helena's under the table. She's my partner, and she'll be part of every decision I make going forward. Something in Matthew's expression softened. Your uncle would have liked her, I think. Nathaniel had a good heart underneath all the recklessness. He would have been proud to call her his daughter. Helena felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. The negotiations took hours. Lawyers went back and forth on language, on terms, on what exactly would be made public. But by the end of the day, they had an agreement. Matthew Ashford would receive compensation. The truth about William Caldwell's crimes would be released to the press. And the Caldwell Company would undergo a complete restructuring with independent oversight. One more thing, Matthew said as they were preparing to leave. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a photograph. This is your father, the real one. I found it among Nathaniel's effects. I thought you might want it. The photograph showed a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, with grey eyes and dark hair. He was laughing at something off camera, his whole face alight with joy. Helena traced the features with her finger, trying to see herself in him. He wasn't a good man, Matthew said quietly, but he wasn't evil either. Just weak, human. He made mistakes and people paid for them. But he was also capable of moments of genuine kindness. I'd hate for you to think you came from pure darkness. Thank you, Helena whispered. The press conference happened the following week. Alexander stood at a podium in front of dozens of cameras and reporters, with Helena beside him, and told the truth about his father's murder of Nathaniel Caldwell, about the cover-up, about decades of illegal business practices and destroyed lives. He acknowledged the harm, promised accountability, and announced the restructuring of the company. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The company's stock price plummeted. Several board members resigned in protest. There were calls for criminal investigations, for Alexander to step down, for the Caldwell empire to be dismantled completely. But there was also something else: support, admiration for his honesty. Recognition that accountability was rare in the world of billionaires and corporate dynasties. Slowly, painfully, the narrative began to shift. The Caldwell name, once synonymous with ruthless power, began to mean something different, something better. Through it all, Helena stood beside him. She gave interviews, talking about her own journey from convent to corporate heir, about the importance of facing uncomfortable truths, about how love could survive even the darkest revelations. She became, almost accidentally, the face of a new kind of privilege, one that acknowledged its debts and tried to make amends. The threats came too, of course. Death threats mostly, from people who thought Alexander should be in prison. From conspiracy theorists who believed he was part of some larger plot. Helena learned to ignore them, to trust the security team, to live with the constant awareness that visibility came with danger. But she also learned that she was strong enough to handle it. Strong enough to be a public figure, a Caldwell, a woman who refused to be defined by her origins. 6 months after the press conference, on a grey London morning, Alexander took Helena back to the Hampstead house. They'd had it renovated. The drawing room where his mother died had been completely rebuilt, turned into something bright and full of life. They walked through the rooms together, and Helena could feel the ghosts settling, becoming quieter. "I want to marry you," Alexander said suddenly, stopping in front of the windows, overlooking the garden. "I know it's complicated. I know people will talk about us being cousins, but I don't care anymore. I love you, Helena, and I want to build a life with you, a real life. Not one based on revenge or debt or family obligation, just us, choosing each other." Helena felt joy bloom in her chest, pure and uncomplicated. "Yes, just like that? No hesitation? I've been sure of you since the night of the storm, since you kissed me in the darkness and I kissed you back. Everything else has just been noise." She took his hands. "Yes, Alexander Caldwell, I'll marry you. I'll be your wife. I'll stand beside you while we rebuild your family's legacy into something we can be proud of." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And Helena thought about how far she'd come from that frightened girl in the convent, how much she'd survived, how much she'd learned about herself. She'd been brought to this house as payment for a debt, as a tool for revenge, as collateral damage in a war between powerful men. But she'd become so much more than that. She'd become a woman who knew her own strength, who understood that love wasn't always clean or simple, but was always worth fighting for. Who could look at darkness and choose light anyway? The wedding was small, private, held in the renovated chapel on the grounds of the Cornwall estate. Mrs. Davison was there, tears streaming down her face. Matthew Ashford came too, having made a tentative peace with Alexander. A handful of friends, a few trusted employees. Helena wore a simple dress, white and elegant, nothing like the elaborate gowns of society weddings. Alexander wore a dark suit, no tie, looking both nervous and happier than she'd ever seen him. When the vicar asked if anyone objected to their union, there was a moment of silence, a held breath, and then the ceremony continued. "I, Alexander James Caldwell, take you, Helena Sarah Caldwell, to be my wife, to stand beside you in truth, in struggle, in joy, to choose you every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, to build something new with you, something better than what came before. I, Helena Sarah Caldwell, take you, Alexander James Caldwell, to be my husband, to love you despite our complicated history because of it, to be your partner in rebuilding what was broken, to remind you always that we are more than our father's sins, that we are the ones who choose love over hate, truth over lies, light over darkness." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that caught the light streaming through the chapel windows. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the handful of witnesses applauded. Helena kissed her husband and thought about the sealed letter that had started all of this. About her mother's words, "Be stronger than I was, be braver." She had been, she was. That night, in the grey stone house overlooking the cliffs, they made love with a tenderness that spoke to everything they'd survived. No desperation now, no fear, just two people who'd chosen each other despite impossible odds. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets that smelled of sea salt and lavender, Alexander traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how we're going to do this. Build a life together. Make the Caldwell name mean something good. Any ideas?" "A few," She smiled against his chest. We could start a foundation. For women leaving situations like mine. For children born into complicated circumstances. For anyone trying to escape their past and build something new. The Helena Caldwell Foundation. The Charlotte and Sarah Foundation, she corrected. For your mother and mine. The women who tried to protect each other. Who loved despite the cost. They deserve to be remembered for that. Alexander pulled her closer. You're brilliant, you know that. I'm learning. She kissed the hollow of his throat. I'm also learning that happy endings aren't really endings at all. They're just new beginnings, and ours is just starting. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Spoken like a true Caldwell. Spoken like a woman who refuses to give up, who chooses hope even when it's hard, who believes in redemption. She looked up at him. This man who'd wanted to break her and had been broken instead, who'd been remade by love into something better. We're going to be all right, aren't we? More than all right. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. We're going to be extraordinary. And lying there in the darkness, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs below, Helena believed him. They were scarred, yes, marked by their pasts, built from darkness and pain, but they were also strong, brave, capable of transforming curses into blessings. They were Caldwells. And together, they would make that name mean something worthy of the love that had brought them through fire. Their story hadn't ended in the convent where it began, or in the mansion where she'd been brought as payment, or even in the chapel where they'd exchanged vows. It would continue day by day, choice by choice, as they built something new from the ruins of what came before. It would continue because they chose it, because they chose each other, because love, real love, was always worth the fight. And Helena, who'd once been taught to be silent and small and afraid, would spend the rest of her life proving that truth could survive even the darkest secrets. That hope could bloom even in the coldest soil. That redemption was always possible for those brave enough to reach for it. She was Helena Caldwell, daughter of two men who'd made terrible choices, granddaughter of a murdered man and a murderer, wife of a man who'd wanted revenge and found love instead. And she was free. Finally, completely, undeniably free. The rest would be whatever they made of it, together.